If I think back to fantasy games from the past, there's a ton I could come up with. But if I think back to fantasy games with outstanding atmospheres, Disciples is probably first on the list. Disciples, a turn-based fantasy strategy series, has demons, dwarves, undead, and whatever else you may come up with, but always manages to come across as truly inspired. The first installment, called Disciples Sacred Lands, was originally released in 1999, developed by the then relatively small Canadian developer Strategy First, now known for having published numerous games. During a time where mainly turn-based strategy game sequels, such as Panzer General 3D and Heroes of Might and Magic 3 were being released, new licenses in the genre weren't all that common. But Sacred Lands held its own, though it was mostly a sleeper hit. Then some years later, in 2002, an excellent sequel was released. Disciples 2: Dark Prophecy. The second installment is in many ways just a straight up upgrade over the first, with very few changes in the gameplay. Disciples is all about 4 different and visually very distinct factions, with all their own appeal. First up is the Empire, a gathering of humanity that consists of knights, paladins, and inquisitors. They follow their god, the Highfather, who sends his angels to aid the Empire. The second faction, the Undead Hordes, follow their goddess Mortis. As the name would give away, they consist of, well, all things undead. Skeletons, zombies, specters, and vampires. Thirdly, the Mountain Clans follow their god Wotan and consists of dwarves, giants, and various bits of steam technology. And finally, the fourth faction are the Legions of the Damned, following their fallen angel Bethrazan, and consists of human cultists and various demonic creatures. These 4 factions all share the same core gameplay mechanics, but have quite a number of subtle differences, ranging from more offensive or more defensive spells, and all have their own powerful units, meaning that they do play out differently. The story itself is quite interesting, and there's quite a lot to the world of Disciples. The story is told mainly in text format, and every faction has their own campaign called a saga. Beyond this, you can play skirmish-like modes called quests, which can be done on and offline. The atmosphere in both games is absolutely fantastic. The maps look strangely alive, even if you happen to be playing the Undead faction, because every faction has their own unique style to their environment, and around every corner, something sinister and majestic is waiting. If you're playing the Empire, your lands will look lush and green, while the Undead Hordes have dark forests and barren landscapes, or the Legions of the Damned have rivers of lava. Disciples 2 especially manages to this day, look fantastic due to the drawn look, with the one downside being that it can be a bit hard to spot specific units on the map. But the look of the game and the grim soundtrack makes it a joy to play. The gameplay in Disciples is basically all about your base, the isometric map you're on, and most importantly your heroes and their units. Whether you're playing one of the sagas or quests, every map has their set base locations for every faction. In this base, you'll be constructing various buildings that mainly allow you to spawn different units. These units in turn must be put in a squad with a leader, as these are the only unit types that can actually traverse the map. There are 3 main leader types, a mage, warrior, and ranger, and these all have slight different changes. Furthermore, there's 2 types of utility leaders, a thief for, well, spying and stealing business, and a rod bearer, used to spread your land across the map. Essentially, you start a match and are given a starter leader, based on if you picked a warrior lord, a mage lord, or a guild master in the menu. You then train some units and place them in the same group as the hero. Furthermore, you can then build one structure every turn inside your base that allows you to upgrade units, and these can be mutually exclusive, so pick them well. You then explore the map with your leader, or leaders, taking over outposts as you go and mainly try to defeat as many enemies as you can without dying yourself, as leveling up is hugely important, not only for the leader itself, but also for all your other units. Disciples is, for its epic theme, not at all about huge armies. Instead, it's all about small, highly upgraded groups of units, and it is the main reason why Disciples takes quite a while to get going, as you'll first have to invest quite a lot of time into leveling up units. and this likely means you'll end up with a few favorite groups that kick all kinds of ass, which can make it a tad on the easy side though. Aside from your units and base, you'll have to take over parts of the land that contain resources from various mana sources to simply straight up gold. Every turn your borders will grow, so taking over an outpost to increase your borders or planting a rod next to a resource is quite important. Eventually, after much spell flinging, carefully picking battles, and taking over resources on the map, you'll come to a specific end goal of the mission, which are never actually about completely destroying your enemy, as taking over the main base of a faction is almost an impossible feat. No, instead, Disciples is about key mission points, such as killing a specific group of creatures, or taking over certain cities. Finally, one of the more apparent changes in Disciples 2 that Sacred Lands didn't have was the ability to defend and wait in combat. Combat itself is done rather quickly. Units have specific ranges, damage outputs, and possibly alternative effects, such as paralyzing your enemies. This too is all turn-based and units themselves never move around. In Disciples 2 you can have units defend, meaning they take half damage for that turn, or wait until other units have gone before them, adding subtle layers of complexity to the combat that the first game didn't have. In short, the missions in Disciples take long, there's a huge focus on leveling up and the equipping aspect of the game, and although it's a ton of fun, it's also a ton of time spent. Combat, on the other hand, is quick and can be over in a few seconds, so pick your fights well. And as if all of that wasn't enough, Disciples 2 has had various expansions, although the first two were a tad odd. In 2003, firstly a standalone expansion called Guardians of the Light was released, followed shortly by another standalone expansion called Servants of the Dark. These two nowadays combine to form what is called Disciples 2, Galleon's Return. However, separately, these are not very great as they add very little. Guardians of the Light included the original Dark Prophecies campaign, plus an expanded campaign for the Empire and Mountain clans, while locking out the Legions of the Damned and the Undead Horde from being available at all. Servants of the Dark in turn did the exact opposite, making neither of the two games really worth picking up for the additional little content. The original game was still a much better pick for those looking to get into the game in the first place. However, later that year, a better third expansion was released, called Disciples 2: Rise of the Elves. And this included an entire new faction, plus campaign, and everything from Dark Prophecies, except for Guardians of the Light or Servants of the Dark. Meaning that, in the end, Guardians of the Light and Servants of the Dark were at the time more disappointing than worth the money. But either way, it is safe to say that Disciples Sacred Lands and Disciples 2 are still a joy to play. Sacred Lands obviously is showing its age, but the stellar gameplay is still there. Disciples 2 is for all intents and purposes a better version, with a graphical style that still looks good, an amazing atmosphere, and all the great gameplay from the first, plus a few subtle improvements. These little 1999 and 2002 masterpieces from Strategy First, especially Disciples 2, are then still more than worth giving a shot. And at any rate, the Legion can always use a new fresh set of cultists.